Hello and welcome to Viewing Room Live from Peoria Riverfront Museum. My name is Bill Conger. I'm the Chief Curator at the museum, and I've got something special lined up, and I have some people here that are going to really blow your minds. First, I want to make sure and thank all of our members at Peoria Riverfront Museum, our Visionary Society members. I also want to mention that this event tonight, our program, really is inspired by an exhibition we're bringing called Guitar, the Instrument That Rocked the World. And it will be here September 25th, and it will be here through January 10th of 2021. The exhibition is going to be fantastic. You're going to see all sorts of guitars. There will be amazing educational components to it as well. But we're also going to feature a little component, a kind of focused exhibition, if you will, on the achievements of the people that we are talking about tonight, Mary Ann Milam and Jerry Milam of Golden Voice Recording Company. And we're going to talk to Jerry tonight. We're going to talk to one of my best, newest friends, Craig Moore, who also owns Younger Than Yesterday, a fantastic record store in Peoria, Illinois. And we're going to talk to a legend, a musical legend that happens to live in the Peoria area, Ron Volz. So we have all of these people on tonight. Jerry, how are you doing tonight? Welcome.
Good, thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here. Craig, how are you doing tonight? Good to see you.
Yep, peachy. Happy to be here.
And Ron Volz, how is the weather in Metamora today?
Oh, the weather's wonderful, Bill.
Excellent. Well, so without further ado, I want to start the program and give, I'm not going to give the background because I am learning the background as we go. And it is an absolute fascinating background. I will say that the museum has 4 pillars of focus: art, history, science, and achievement. Golden Voice Record Company checks all of those boxes. And so that makes this the perfect topic to explore tonight in the Peoria area, in South Pekin, Illinois, 30 minutes from Peoria, literally in the middle of a cornfield as I share my screen here. A company emerged that rivaled really Sam Phillips' idea, you know, behind Sun Studios, and a myriad of others that sprouted up throughout the United States. And it was called Golden Voice. And Jerry and Mary Ann Milam created it. Jerry, I'm going to show the next slide is going to be one that probably takes you back a little bit. Well, this is the spot that it happened when it was a cornfield, but here we are. How many years ago is this, first of all?
That was about 1964.
And you're breaking ground for a studio that you are conceptualizing. Had you seen a studio like this, or did you just decide, I'm going to do this?
No, I actually never visited other studios. It was pretty much out of my head, which most people thought it was out of my head. But it was just, I built the building large enough that I could accommodate larger clients like choirs and things like that. So that's why the rear of the building's large, and it's quite tall because it went into the ground another 6 or 8 feet.
Unbelievable. And so you're telling me you hadn't been to any recording studios, or was your exposure very minimal, or had you ever been in one? Did you know how to kind of organize it? Or
what I had been in, Bill, was pretty amateurish, just pretty much recorders sitting on a tabletop and things like that. But I had an idea what had to be done. Most of the recording equipment back then was really crude, so you couldn't really go to a really fancy full-blown studio. Now you could go to Nashville and they had a little bit better setups in some of the cities, but I really didn't make those trips.
Wow. So just seeing the images to me, I mean, you've seen these for over 50 years, closing in on 60 years. And your children, is that your children that are
Yeah.
kind of wandering around is it, so they literally grew up with Golden Voice, literally.
That is true.
It's incredible. I'm imagining that some of the complexities in doing this, I mean, you're probably learning as you went. Is that fair to say?
Very much so. And Mary and I were both working full time and then building this on the side. So it was a lot of hours. Our typical weeks were 80-hour weeks for both of us, because she was taking care of the children and working a couple jobs, and I was pretty much following the same path.
Yeah. The images we're looking at now are some of the images of the control booth and the some of the equipment at the time. That's you that we're looking at in both instances at the bottom, correct?
Yes, that's right in the very beginning. So the equipment was really minimalized at that point. The gentleman on the left standing there with me by the microphone is Bill Porter. He was a chief engineer at RCA in Nashville, and we become friends. And then he went on to do all of Elvis's work, both recording and on the road. So we had a real good relationship with Bill.
So those folks who don't know your story this is going to unfold for them. But at this stage of the game, Jerry, as we know, 50 years later, you're going to have an amazing career with all sorts of people coming through those doors. But at this point, when this photograph is taken, is this a milestone for you, or is this another day in the life of?
Well, first of all, the top photos, Bill, are the lower level of our home in Pekin.
Okay.
So the equipment on the right side there was the starting equipment, and that was only a little 2-track studio, where the one on the lower level was a 4-track. Nowadays, you could have 100 tracks, but back then you were limited by what the equipment could do. And so those top 2 pictures was one of the rooms in the lower level, and the right side was a small control room with some equipment in it.
Amazing. And how long before people like Elvis Presley's future recording technicians start to visit you?
Well, I was real bold. And once I got things rolling, I made a lot of phone calls. And anytime we cut a tape for a group or for an individual, and I thought it had merit, I would ask them if they would want me to send that out. And back in those days, you could actually contact a high official of a record company without a whole lot of problem. Nowadays, that's very difficult. But back then, they were very receptive to listening to what I had to offer, because being a studio owner, they knew that there would be a lot of people coming through that studio in the future.
Got it.
And there could be hidden talent that could really do well.
Well, and some of that hidden talent came fairly quickly, right? This is one of our guests today. This is a couple of bands, Ron, that you were in early on. I'm imagining you were in many more as your career went on. But your time at Golden Voice, did it propel you to the places that we see on this screen? And if people cannot see it, because they might be looking on their phone. We're looking at the Dean Martin Show. You were on the Ed Sullivan Show. You were on American Bandstand. Tell us about your story and how Jerry figures into this.
Well, Bill, I think first you kind of go back to Jerry and I have known each other, I would say, since at least 1958. And we pretty much got together, and I've told this story before about Billy Hill's music store on Warren Memorial Drive. This guy had a little store up there where all of us young hippies, before hippies were about, actually gathered up there. And we met up there. Jerry was a guitar player. I was a guitar player. But the one thing about him that really stood out is he played a thing called Chet Atkins style. Now, if you're familiar with Chet Atkins, he's the guy that plays the bass line and the chord line and the melody, all with 2 hands, which is pretty amazing. And for me to watch Jerry do that just blew me away. As far as the rest of the photos you're showing, a lot of that was pre-Jerry, I would think, or at the same time. No, I would say at the same time that we knew each other, but Jerry was still, I think at that time, you were a photographer, Jerry, because you took great pictures. And then you also worked for Washburn's. I think you were a music store guy.
That's true.
You did all that stuff. And we kind of touched base on and off through those years. I went on with the Rockin R's, which was our recording studio was a 4x8 telephone booth in the basement of a house in Peoria, Illinois, where we cut our first record. So for when we got involved with each other as Golden Voice concerned, I had already been in these venues. And what I would do is when I was coming through Central Illinois, I would always call Jerry and see him. And in the beginning, if you look at that lower photo of myself and my little brother Greg, Jerry was looking for a band, I believe, so he could test the equipment and get things off the ground. And I had mentioned to my little brother, at that time they had a band called the Wombats. And they did pretty well for a young group. They even did, I think, the Illinois State Fair. But I would kind of tutor those guys and mentor them along. I said, recommended, why don't you call Jerry? He could probably do a lot of great things for you. And of course they did. And they were the first band to play, I believe. Isn't that right, Jerry, in Golden Voice?
That is true.
Yeah, and from that position, but the rest of the stuff with the Dean Martin shows and Ed Sullivan shows, that's when I kind of turned in. I went from being a guitar player, singer to a guitar player, singer who twirled guns, tap danced, did acrobatic dancing, and anything got in the way from showbiz, because we went more the route of Las Vegas and the nightclub era, where the Rockin R's were more of a festival group, an event group, because we had a record, like you mentioned, got us on American Bandstand. But Jerry was he and I have known each other so darn long, it's unreal. The one thing that I remember so well was, since that studio was in the middle of a cornfield, he and I decided to start this company called Cofield. But he thought it was Cornfield Productions, and I thought it was Cooperative Field of Music. We never discussed that till years later. But I think we had one release on that label, and it was mine, which was kind of funny. Yeah, no, a lot of this background stuff was things that I had gotten involved with from the time I was in high school. But that doesn't. I spent so much time at Golden Voice. And I produced albums there myself. Even I did my own albums there. Jerry and I have been around back and forth together for 60 years, if not more. So, yeah, interesting.
Ronnie, would you tell him about Greg, where he went from this picture?
Well, that's a good part. Now, Greg, of course, became the lead singer with Petra. And of course, they sold 10 million albums, you know. And in fact, when he finally decided to leave Petra, he asked me to manage him, which I did. And I started a record company. We worked out in Nashville for a good number of years. So yeah, no, Greg originally was like John, his cousin John, and the other two guys in the group. He had that little Wombats group. And I think he had another group called Gideon's Bible. I think that was it, wasn't it, Jerry?
Yes.
You know, I think was so funny is that tune they did at Golden Voice. What was the first song they recorded? I thought it was so good. It should have been a big hit. I can't remember the name of it. Isn't that something?
So Ron, you're originally from Metamora, is that correct?
Yeah, and the Rockin R's were from Metamora, you know.
And so you're from the cornfield. You're from a different cornfield.
Heavens, yes. My grandparents had both farms, and I grew up, was a town kid, you know, but spent a lot of time on the farm, sure.
As we go on, we're going to see more of our local, the talent here that was cultivated in the Peoria area. We're going to see things that people know. We're going to see things people don't know. My question to all of you is, how important is a studio in a cornfield in the middle of an area? How important is that in terms of locating talent that ends up literally changing the trajectory of, in this case, American music? Would these stories have happened without Golden Voice? That's, I guess, my question.
No.
Well,
I think that
go ahead.
it's
Clay.
easy to answer is no.
That studio was immaculate. That was a God saver to all of us guys, and I think every musician in Central Illinois. There were no such things south of Chicago that I knew of. Oh,
Yeah.
Champaign had a couple studios, I think. But yeah, no, the cornfield thing was like turn it into Hiram Walker, if you will. It really lifted everybody up. You know?
That's incredible. And so from cornfields to the suburbs to the actual city, our region still continues to move with Golden Voice through time here. Jerry, I'm just going to turn it over to you. I think probably most of our viewers in the Peoria area are going to know what's going on here, but give us a little background on the history here.
Well, you're looking at a couple of groups of coachmen and people that some of the starters in Peoria started in, which Dan Fogelberg was one of them. And these musicians moved around a bit from band to band. And as things turned out, we were all just kind of searching for a sound and a style and all that kind of thing. And as tapes were being sent out and being reviewed, we were getting feedback, and that's how so many of these contracts came about over time. Now, Craig can tell you a story about his own band. I got hooked up with a big booking agency out of Champaign called Blytham Limited, and they were booking the major talent out of the Midwest. I think Craig could verify they maybe had over 100 bands that they were managing and booking. And I worked a deal with the owners of that agency that if they sent me business, which I needed at the time, I would give them credit hours that they could use the studio free. So that really turned into a good thing. And a lot of bands like REO and stuff kind of got formed that way because Blytham would come up to the studio for maybe 25 or 30 credit hours, and they would walk in there with 15 musicians. And they would try a drummer from this band and a guitar player from that one. And through that mix, a lot of talent came out of there. And Craig can tell you a story how his band went down to Blytham and interviewed for this very thing. So I'll let you tell it, Craig.
Hello,
You're there.
am I there? Okay. Yeah, I mean, boy, you know, there's a lot flying around here that's making me think of a lot of things, but the story Jerry's talking about is I am well aware of Blytham's penchant for putting bands together. It was especially Irving Azoff was notorious for taking somebody from this band and that band and putting them together. My band in Keokuk, Iowa, heard about Blytham. We didn't really know what a booking agent was, Jerry. we didn't really know what that was exactly. We didn't have one. There weren't any in my hometown. So one day we just got in the truck and drove from Keokuk, Iowa to Blytham in Champaign and showed up uninvited and unannounced. And John Barrick called the Chances Are, which is a club, you know, in Peoria, we had the Second Chance, which was a concert club, Class A concert club, but that was the secondary venue for the people who owned Chances Are in Champaign. And he called them up and told them that they had this band that showed up out of the blue, and could he bring us down there and do an audition. And so we did. We went down and played for John Barrick, Bob Nutt, and Irving Azoff for, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And then tore down, put our stuff away, and went back up to Blytham's office, where Irving Azoff proceeded to tell the band that he was interested in me, but not so much the band. Which that, you know, that was a little, I didn't know quite how to deal with that.
So Jerry, or actually Craig, Jerry, Ron, any of you, was that the case with Dan Fogelberg? Did, go ahead.
Dan actually started with local bands, and he kind of got the urge to break off in his own. So he started coming into the studio doing tracks as a solo. And that kind of got him departing from the local scene as far as working with the groups that he was starting with. And then one thing led to another, and Blytham, who we're talking about, the booking agency, liked what they heard that Dan had, and they then said, we can work with you. And one thing led to another, and the promotion started. I took his first tapes actually to Chicago, to Wooden Nickel Records, and let them hear Dan's talent when he was very young. And his father used to come out to the studio on his lunch hours because he was a band director at Pekin High School. And I told his dad, I said, well, you know, I took Dan's tapes up to Chicago and they were really knocked out with what they heard. And they said they would sign him right away if he was available. So Larry Fogelberg, his father, he was really in the throes of saying, wow, should I do this or not? Dan's so young. But from that point on, it all worked out. Dan got into business and got him a major record contract. And now that middle disc, the silver one there on the bottom, that's a 3 million seller there. That's called a platinum. And of course, he had golds before that. So who knows today, that platinum may be 5 million, you know,
Yeah,
because that stuff goes on and on.
Mhm.
unbelievable. And that's a greatest hits platinum, right, Jerry? So you contributed some of the work on that.
Yeah. Now, some of them we did most of the whole album, but on that greatest hits album, that's one that we were part of also.
Right.
Now, the thing about the way things were recorded later on, as the equipment got better and we had more tracks to work with, we went from 4-track to 8-track to 16 to 24-track. And of course, you had to invest all over again because you had to keep just putting tons of money into the business to keep up. Once you start developing a lot of tracks, we wouldn't use all those tracks up. We would leave some open. So if a person like Dan come in and recorded, say, 10 tracks or 12 tracks on his own, then he could take that tape to LA or New York or whatever, and they would do what they call sweetening, where they would add strings and different things to it. And that's how a lot of the projects got done throughout the industry.
Excellent. Interesting. Well, Dan is an incredible Peoria story. We're going to move forward, but I do want to leave Dan with one part of personal pride. The only thing I have in common with Dan Fogelberg is I at one time had his English teacher. I'm a Woodruff Warrior as well. Go Warriors. I'd be remiss without giving Woodruff a plug there. So I'm a huge Dan fan. So
Build it too.
as we move forward, another Central Illinois, actually Illinois in general, Champaign, Peoria, etc. So as time goes on, Jerry, I can see that your radius is expanding. You're kind of getting out, growing out into Illinois. We're looking at here some Gary Richrath images, and of course, up here in the upper left is not. I don't believe Gary's in that. Maybe he is. I'm not sure, but I put it in here because the bass player Bruce Hall, who ends up becoming REO Speedwagon's bass player, also recorded with you under a different band, Feather Train, out of Champaign, correct?
Yes.
And
my wife,
Suburban
Mary-
9 to 5 was Gary's band. So
Yes, Mary and Craig really know all the history of this stuff. Over the years, I recorded so many people that I kind of lose track, but she's a historian and Craig's a historian. And all this.
sure.
And bands like Suburban 9 to 5 was really a mainstay here in Peoria that really sparked a lot of interest. And I wish I had Mary on camera right now because she could tell the whole thing, but I think Craig knows a lot of the history also.
Yeah, Suburban spawned a few things. Scott Somerville was the singer in the Shags, and there's another whole story there with the Shags. They recorded 2 singles at Golden Voice, and I suppose they probably did their Bergner's commercial over there too, didn't they?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's a pretty famous little clip you can see on YouTube. Is the Shags doing a Bergner's commercial that did you engineer that, Jerry? Probably, huh?
Yes. I think in the screen before this, the Coachman was shown there, and the Coachman, I believe Dan was in the Coachman, right? Yeah, he was.
Yeah, he was in the New Coachman, the latter day band. And that's the record that they made.
The groups are kind of shifting around, musicians moving from one band to the other, because some wanted to rock more and others wanted to not rock as much. So,
Sure.
like I say, I've kind of lost track of all that, but Mary and Craig's got the history of it all.
So Jerry, you in preparing for this, you were kind enough to leave me with some very important ledgers, etc., from early years at Golden Voice, and it's notated that REO would maybe just show up and need some time here and there. How does that work? How does REO Speedwagon calls you up and just walks in, or?
Well, they would book time themselves, but there again, they would also work through Blytham on Blytham's free hours because they had credit hours. They were sending me a lot of work, and I really needed it in those days. And those credit hours were very valuable because Blytham, like most booking agencies and managers, they were really searching for record labels. They wanted to get their artists signed because once someone got signed to a major label, that was really a big deal for an agency.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You had a local agent here that brought some bands over too, yeah? The Peoria Musical, Hank Skinner.
Hank did a lot of work there. Bill Curtis out of Canton. I had good local cooperation. Everybody thought it was kind of an insane project in the beginning, but once it started catching on, it kind of multiplied and everybody kind of got into it, which was really nice.
Yeah.
And it's good for us because we can now make a living with it. In the beginning, when Mary would try to get loans for things like equipment, and the banker would look at her like, what? You're going to build a music recording studio?
Well, I mean, that's a very good point. As time is moving forward, you have to stay up with technology. Times are no different than they are now. And how difficult is it for a small studio to, you're really competing with larger places.
You bet. And it's just like the video business. You have got to stay marching with it all the time, because if the studio down the road has 16 track and you've got 8 track, there's some of your business gone right there. You got to get in the mix and you got to keep up with it. And every one of those jumps, both in the tape machines with the tracks and the recording consoles, that equipment just got expensive as you can't believe.
Unreal. So Jerry, a question. I have a question that came through Facebook, and I want to make sure we don't miss it. Can you recall what the hourly rates would have been in the 60s and 70s for a recording studio like yours?
What do you think, Ronnie? You remember?
I think most of our time was gratis paid. We used to come through, on the road, and I would call you and say, "Hey, Jerry, I want to bring the band in and want to record." He said, "Well, bring them on in." We'd come in with no sleep from Indianapolis and record all day and night, and then go out the door and head towards back to Vegas. I don't think you even charged me on a lot of that stuff.
Well, you were a good friend.
My own album. That one, you got an hourly rate out of it. I remember that. I thought, he's finally taking a buck off me for crying out loud. But I think you did a lot of that for a lot.
Mary's going to hand me a note here. Let me see what she says. We don't know what the hourly rate is. I think it was in the $35 an hour range.
$35 or so.
Yeah.
Incredible.
And Bill,
Now,
the, yeah,
3,500.
Bill, I just came across a Billboard magazine ad from somewhere in the early 60s,
mhm.
because I've always wondered about the difference. And maybe Jerry can talk about this a little bit if there was such a thing at Golden Voice. I always wondered about the difference between mono and stereo recording because, you know, in the 60s, the mono album might have been $2.98, but the stereo one would be $3.98. And I
Right.
always wondered, you know, how they pulled that little game off. But I saw this ad in Billboard recently from, I don't know, 63 or something,
Wow.
66 maybe. And it literally had a New York City recording studio rate, hourly rate. And it was, in fact, something like $30 for mono and $40 an hour for stereo. So they charged more to record your band in stereo.
I'll be darned. But
Was there anything like that consideration at Golden Voice when you started out? Did you even do mono?
No, I didn't do any mono. Actually, I started stereo, and no one actually requested mono from us. So the
But
music.
you mixed the singles down to mono for 45s?
I never had a request for that, Craig, as I recall.
Oh,
Our rate wasn't any different. We
yeah.
just had a standard rate, and
Mhm. I was really surprised to see that.
well,
that they actually separated it.
Mary Ann's memory is impeccable. She
trying
nailed.
to feed me notes here. I can't read on camera at the same time.
Well, as you're looking at the notes, we've advanced to another band, and now we're starting to get hits that people my age, people just older than me, who were teenagers when these songs came out, they know these songs inside. These are songs that are now permeating pop culture and rock culture and radio culture, and some of them are coming out of Golden Voice. And one of those amazing stories is Head East. Do you want to bring us in there?
Yes, Head East was working a long time in clubs and traveling all over, and they really got the bug to record, and they wanted to do an album, but it was so expensive because the tracks were getting more. We had 16 track at that time period, and Roger Boyd and I sat down and we worked out a situation that I gave him a pretty good deal on studio time and I think 5,000 pressings of the album. And they found an investor that put up enough money that they could afford to come in the studio. And that's how Flat as a Pancake came about. And it was a really successful thing. The fellow that put up the money got paid back, unlike the music business where they normally don't. But he got paid back, and the record went 1 million sales or more. And then we did a second album for him. We become friends over the years. One thing that I'd like to step back to, Bill, that we kind of missed along the way,
Yeah.
Jonathan Cain of Journey was named Jonathan Friga of Chicago when he came down to the studio. His brother Tommy and he came down and they did all the parts. The two of them did the vocals and all the instrumentals. And at that time, I only had 4-track. So I was jumping tracks all over the place where I had to record on one track and jump it to another and record over the top of the old one. And you couldn't make mistakes because you couldn't back up. We were so limited on tracks. Well, to say the least, Jonathan Cain or Jonathan Friga, he was quite a talent. He just tremendously had the talent. And when the session was done, they spent 3 days at the place and Mary cooked them a few hamburgers while they were there and so on. And I said to John, I said, you know, I want to send these down to Nashville. I have a good connection down there and I'd like them to hear this. And they got back to me within a few days and said, wow, we would like to meet this fellow. So I got a hold of John and I said, here's the deal. If you go down to Nashville, I think you can get a record contract. And John's words to me was, are these guys big time guys or are they little guys? And I said, big time. So him and his dad was on an airplane in about 3 days, went down to Nashville, got signed to Dial Records there on the bottom left. And that's Jonathan Cain. On the far left, there was Mary and I at the Civic Center. And that was John's start. He started in Nashville and then moved out to LA, played with the Babies and a couple other groups, and got an offer to go with Journey. And from then on, that kind of kept Journey alive because John, tremendous musician, phenomenal writer, and John is just such a humble guy. He's just thanked us all the way. When they got inducted into the Hall of Fame, right on television, he thanked us in Pekin, Illinois. He wrote a book. He dedicated a full page to us for that. So there are a lot of musicians that did well, that really were good people all the way down the line. And Johnny was really one of them. And a lot of the hits that they still play that you hear of Journey, that's John's. He wrote the music and wrote the lyrics and so on.
Jerry, it's incredible that, I mean, these things don't happen by accident. These are great talents that are finding you, but early on, you're really, my opinion is that you're molding and shaping, and you're also, I know this, but from talking to you, you're also positioning some of these people as you get on in the business. You're meeting the big dogs, and you would often go on your own and shop their recordings for them. Is that right?
And I didn't do that for a percentage. I just did it as a favor. But that favor, if it happened, it came back to us in more business for the studio because, you know, that built our reputation that we could help get people placed with record companies. And it made us look better that, wow, if that studio is turning out material that a record company will sign, maybe we should record there. So it was a real beneficial thing to us.
Yeah. And so included here, just to talk about what you've already said, what a great guy Jonathan Cain is, but Mary Ann, I'm including her a little bit here. I hope she's not angry with me for doing it, but she would, if she needed a favor, if she at one point was doing some college work and asked for some feedback, and he would handwrite letters back to her, which is included here, just a little tiny segment. This is a guy, and I'm sure he's a very kind man, but you guys must have really impacted him at a point in his career and a point in his maturity, his maturation, that really helped him along in a significant way, because I don't think a lot of stars do that. I might be wrong, but I kind of doubt it.
What did you say, Mary?
The other,
No, we were trying to prompt me.
no, it's okay. Jerry, some of the other images we have here, we of course have Styx in the upper right. I bet many people don't know Styx recorded at Golden Voice. Can you tell us a little about Styx?
I become close to Styx as a band before they recorded with us because Gary Loizo, who was their engineer, and he also ran their sound on the road, he had a major hit years ago called Bend Me and Shape Me. That was a big single back when Ronnie was really popular and they were getting on Bandstand, because Gary and his band was on Bandstand at a similar time Ronnie and his group was. And Gary had me do a lot of work at his studio. We installed equipment for him because I also had another company going where I sold pro audio equipment, and I helped other people get in the studio business eventually. And Gary, I was working with him and he wanted to do some reconstruction on the studio, and the Styx got real anxious to do a new album. So they said, well, what are we going to do, Gary? And he said, hey, let's just go down to my buddy's place in South Pekin, Jerry Milam. And so he brought Styx down there and he engineered the session. And that's how they become recording in South Pekin.
Wow.
And that was really nice of him. And Styx would actually hire me before they would do an album to come up and check Gary's equipment in his room before they would record a new album. So that's where we had a good interface.
Unbelievable. And I mean, any one of these acts, any one of these stories, are worthy of a viewing room segment all to themselves. So anybody who thinks we're kind of racing through them, you know, we probably are, and we probably will dig a little deeper into some of these in some future ones. But Andre Crouch, Jerry, how does that? I mean,
He came and visited us, and he had a friend that was doing an album there, a lady that was a Olympic runner. And so there was an interface there, and Andre was in the area. I think he was in Chicago and came down and spent a day or two with us. And he's acting silly there at the console with a couple of patch cords, like he's driving the console. And he was a very nice fellow, just very nice. And Christy Lane there in the bottom right, she didn't do a lot of her actual big time recording there, but she started there and we did all of her tests and convinced her husband that he wanted to invest in her. And he took a little bit different route in that he wanted the Nashville musicians, which is an intelligent thing if you got the money, because at the time they had the best strings and the best arrangers and things. So Christy did most of her big recordings there, that we were connected with them all along the way. We made trips to Nashville with them and sat in on their sessions. And so it was a really nice thing from day one.
wow. And was one day at a time recorded at Golden Voice?
No, that was done in Nashville.
That was in Nashville.
Yeah.
Jerry, I have a couple questions. One of them I think I know the answer to, but you're the man. Was the hit song "Lady" recorded at Golden Voice?
Who's the artist?
Well, that's I'm not sure. We'll have that person elaborate. Go to the next question while they
Okay.
follow up.
You know who the lady was?
Oh, "Lady" by Styx. I'm sorry.
Oh, Lady by Styx. Oh, I don't know if it's on that Man of Miracles album or not, but that is the only single album that we did for them. So if it's not on that one, it would have been on another.
You're shaking your head, Craig. You say no. Is that
It's on the first album, first Wooden Nickel album.
okay? Okay. And then another question: where did band members or groups or individual talent, where did they stay when they were recording with you in Pekin?
Just pretty well at motels and hotels and ate at the fast food places and everything else. We were all just a bunch of ruffians at the time. No one was really big time, and it was just a real common thing. You know, here I am a photographer all my life and rarely ever took a photo of our studio or any of the talent that came there, because it was just like working a job. We were just all searching for what we could do and what we can improve on and things. So it's not like you're looking up to each other. You know, it's just like, hey, we're just here to do a job. Let's do it.
Right. Talk a little bit about Steve Gibson.
Steve Gibson is a real special case. As a young man, way before he was of age, he was such a great guitarist you could not believe. I mean, I played fingerstyle guitar and he could run circles around me at half my age. And Steve played with local country bands, and he would come to the studio and he would back artists. And a fellow named Carl Trantham wrote a song called Caterpillar Man, and he let Steve arrange it, and Steve played guitar parts on it. And from that record on, Steve got interest in Nashville, and they asked him to come down there if he wanted to be a session player, because he had offers to go out on the road with some of the country artists, and he thought that would be a great deal, but being a session player was even better. And the first week that Steve was in Nashville, he was being hired to do professional sessions. And I think to date, he's done over 12 or 13,000 recording sessions in Nashville.
Unbelievable. With of course the hits, "Please Come to Boston," right, with Dave Loggins. But he's worked with, it's too long, and we'll miss everybody, but Dolly Parton, Neil Diamond, and Neil Young, both Neils, Eddie Rabbitt, George Strait. He in the Country Music Hall of Fame, director of the Grand Ole Opry. I mean, and he's from Peoria. We didn't mention, right?
Yes.
Absolutely incredible. It's just
one other thing, Bill, it was kind of unique. When Steve would come out to do a session as a session player, I would hire him. His dad, Chet, would have to drive him out because he wasn't old enough to drive a car. And yet he could sit in a session and just play the greatest guitar parts you could ever imagine. And here this young kid can't drive a car yet. Dad's got to drive him.
Unbelievable. I want to go to a character here that we have with us. This is Craig. Tell us about your intro to Golden Voice #1. I want to know that. And then what I want to make sure that everyone knows, beyond the fact that this great record store, Younger Than Yesterday in Peoria, but I want everyone to understand the breadth of talent that you worked with, Jerry, from gospel singers, gospel acts, to country, rock, psychedelic rock. We've got everything going on in this little place in South Peak, and to me, it's just most remarkable that you were able to, as an engineer, handle all these different types of these modes of expression that are coming into the studio. I think that's absolutely a remarkable achievement.
Well, I did hire people, Bill. I hired a couple engineers along the way, and
Sure.
maybe they would have a little bit better feel on one style of music than I would. And so we traded off sessions, who recorded what, and that worked out quite well usually.
Yeah. So
I did all the early stuff myself. I really burnt the candle because we would typically start recording in the afternoon, at 2 a.m. we're still at it. So it was a vicious business as far as putting in the time.
that's the music biz.
Because like Dan Fogelberg, when he would come there, he would want to record in a dark studio. So we'd turn the lights down and he would sit there with just enough light on so that he could see his instrument, because they wanted that mood. So most people didn't want to record in the bright sunlight, even though they were in the building. They wanted to do it in the evenings.
Interesting. Wow. And where does Craig Moore come in? Tell us about how you find Peoria, Craig.
As far as, excuse me, we were talking earlier about, the presence or lack thereof of recording studios around in the 60s when Jerry built Golden Voice. I didn't live here. I lived over along the Mississippi at Keokuk. And there were 2 recording studios nearby, one of them in Burlington, called Electronics and Engineering. It was literally the back room of this electronics store, which it could have been Jerry's place, because it was full of electronics, and I know how he was into all of that kind of thing. And just one room at the back of the building, and a mono Wallensack 2-track tape deck. And he used, his name was Bob Mefford. And that's where the band you see there, Gone, in like December of '66, we recorded our first record in that room. And he had 2 microphones. I wish I knew what they were so Jerry could talk about them. One of them, he had us set up along the wall, the amps along the wall, the drums at one end, and a microphone pointed one direction towards the drummer, and the other microphone pointed the other way towards the rhythm guitar player. And those 2 mics pointed at nobody in particular, recorded the whole thing. And if you heard the record, you would never believe that.
Wow.
And he put echo on the recording live as it went down. And somehow or other, he made this incredible record. And then the other studio was down the river at Quincy, and that was in the basement of Freddie Teakin's house. and that was called It Records. He had a label. And it was a tiny little room. I don't know what it was before he built a studio in it. And then the control room was literally the closet in this room. And he had a Gates console, which Jerry knows what that is. He had a Gates console with the gigantic knobs on it. And that was all recorded. The first time I was there in '65, that was just 2-track mono recording, like your tape recorder in your high school gymnasium, you know. And then the second time I was there in '67, he actually had a 4-track recorder. That was high tech. Well, then I ended up playing with Fred in a band called Ilmo Smokehouse, which over the years evolved into a heavy rock band. And Fred took us to Golden Voice. And I believe it was Terry Jameson would have been the engineer. But when we got to Golden Voice, that was the first time I'd ever actually been in a real studio. And to us, it was the real deal, you know, because we had been recording either in the Bob Mefford's back room at the electronics store or in Freddie's basement. So to go into Golden Voice here was this huge, perfectly tuned room. And, you know, the rack of gear there that you see in the pictures that you've got.
Yeah.
It was like the big time by comparison to what we had been through before that in the 60s and the early 70s. So that was pretty amazing. And I still have those recordings, although we never did finish them. We never did like go back and work more on them or anything.
Yeah. So Jerry, what happens to Golden Voice toward the end of the trajectory of the studio? And can you kind of quickly tell us how Golden Voice ends, or how it ended for you?
What happened, Bill, was that as I was doing more and more sessions, I was getting a little burnout on it because the long hours, 7 days a week, week after week, month after month. And even though I had engineers working for me also, I was still putting in way too many hours. And I saw an emerging business coming to where other people wanted to have a studio of their own. Now today, it's like popcorn. Everybody's got a recording studio in their house. But back then, all that equipment wasn't inexpensive where everybody could just run out and buy it. So they had to go to somebody that kind of specialized, that knew what he was doing. And they thought that I knew that, I guess, because I got a lot of telephone calls from a lot of people that said, can you help us do our own project? So I started a business called Milam Audio, a real original name. And I started handling equipment, and then eventually did studio design. And that business really took off. I mean, it was just unbelievable. That industry was just emerging, and it really went big time, and it went national. I did studios in California and all over. But what was nice about it was we eventually sold the studio to 2 of the employees, a fellow named Mike Sullivan and Terry Jameson, who was one of the engineers. And we transitioned it over to them. And the sad thing is, somewhere along the way, it got torched. Someone burnt the building, and the only thing that saved the building was a fireman from South Pekin saw a vent on the back side of our control room, and he stuck a high pressure hose through that vent and just sprayed the whole studio with water. And that kept the whole building from collapsing and burning down. But the shame of it all was that today it probably could have been a museum if all the equipment and things were still in place. But it burnt so much of the interior and destroyed so much of the equipment that it got put on the market. The fellow bought it and rebuilt it, and he lives in it now.
So kind of a sad, not kind of, really a tragic end to to the studio itself. However, that structure does exist, and there, that is really a wonderful kind of thing for people. We can actually see the location. We can see the shell of, and imagine some of the magic that went on in there.
Yeah, it's a building. It's been, he's built onto it, built a side room and different things, but it still looks like the original building. And it sits right on the edge of South Peak, and as you go west out of town, it's right on the left side. We had a full acre of property there, and it sits right on the corner of that 1 acre of property.
Unbelievable. I have another question. I'm going to read it as I see it here. Did you ever get around to recording choirs? I guess like you actually thought you would be doing, in a large room, I guess.
Yeah, choirs as in like church choirs and things.
Don't know. I assume so.
Yeah, we first did the Young Folk, which was a really nice multi-voiced group from Peoria of young people. We did 2 albums on them, but we had countless churches come there with anywhere from 8 people to 30 or 40 or 50 people. And the room was big enough to handle that. So we did a lot of that recording. Did a lot of pressing for them. I was hooked up with all the record pressing companies, and we handled getting the records pressed and the jackets made and things like that. So yes, we did a lot of choirs.
Excellent. Excellent. This is absolutely incredible. And I know that an hour of everybody's time here is a lot to ask, but I so appreciate Ron Volz, thank you for coming on, and Craig Moore, thank you for really introducing the museum to all these talents and legends, and you are yourself a conduit to the greatness here. And Jerry and Marianne Milam, thank you for actually doing it, for doing what everyone should be doing in our area, which is being great and doing great things and having dreams and running after them. It's an incredible story.
I'd like to mention one other thing. I didn't mention a fellow named Chet Gilbert along the way. He had a big country theater down in Petersburg, Illinois. He did the most albums with us of anyone. He did 12 or more albums, complete country albums. And he was a tremendous client, and he spread the word all over the Midwest for us. So we had all these fingers going out every direction, because a lot of our clients were salespeople for us, because they were trying to give us credit for what we were doing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to mention one more thing, and we're going to, oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. You guys are too good. The questions keep coming. So I'm sorry, you got, would Irving Azoff still take your call without an appointment, is the question. I'm guessing, I think it may be a rhetorical question, huh? I want to make sure our audience knows, during the run of Guitar, the instrument that rocked the world, we're going to have an exhibition of Golden Voice memorabilia, items, objects, photographs, guitars, etc. That do what we did tonight, which is just skim the surface of this amazing accomplishment in Peoria. And Peoria Riverfront Museum is so happy and proud that we could have done this tonight. So without further ado, oh yes, and I would be remiss, thank you, Jay Goldberg, just in time. We do need to mention these images. I'd say 90% of the imagery out of this presentation tonight came from an exquisite documentary on that you can access on YouTube, and that should be mentioned. And really, if this should have whet your appetite for a deeper story, and that's the deeper story. And I think it's 18 segments, Jerry.
Yes, and what's nice about it, you don't have to watch the whole thing. You can watch it in parts, and you can jump around in part.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Marianne and Chris Gilbert are responsible for that whole project. I did the video shoot and I did some of the panning that puts everybody to sleep, but and doing some of my dialogue in there. But it's quite a nice video on YouTube. And the beauty of it is you can watch one part or 18 parts. You don't have to watch it all at once. And it's at Golden Voice Story on YouTube. If they type in Golden Voice Story, you can find it.
And put aside a little time, which is great. It doesn't leave too many stones uncovered. Gentlemen, thank you. And to everyone who tuned in tonight, and I think we might have broke some records tonight. We had tons of people watching, and I know why. It's a great story. So thanks to all of you. Thanks to everyone who was watching. Please visit Peoria Riverfront Museum. We are open for business, and September 25th, Guitar, the instrument that rocked the world, and Golden Voice Recording Company will have an exhibition there as well. So thank you. Tune in to the next Viewing Room Live, and good night.